Abigail. They walked through swamps and mountains and along train tracks, and then took a bus from Guatemala to the Mexican border. When they were apprehended and thrown into the detention center, she asked for food, but the guard just told her to eat shit. There's no health care in the detention center, she said. Or beds. Just mattresses on the floor and a thin sheet. Nobody wants to be in Tapachula, she said. They want to go to the U.S. They cannot go back to Honduras. In February of 2020, we traveled to the southern border of Mexico in hopes of better understanding the migration crisis currently taking place. We were woefully unprepared for the raw and unfiltered stories we heard from the migrants we met. Many had experienced sexual assault, kidnapping, disappearances, and death of their loved ones along the way. With pressure from Trump to keep migrants from entering the U.S., Mexico has often resorted to extreme measures. In 2019, they went as far as to send 20,000 National Guard troops to physically block migrants from crossing the border. And, since Mexico stopped issuing travel permits to migrants, they're ostensibly trapped unless they choose to return back to the places they are fleeing from. Because of this, Chiapas, Mexico, which ranks last in GDP per capita, receives 60% of asylum applications. While there, most have no place to live. Some sleep in the park, while others are housed at detention centers, sleeping like sardines head to foot. Despite these unideal conditions, many stick it out, since something worse awaits them back home. Unfortunately, only 15% actually achieve refugee status. The rest are deported or left waiting in detention or homeless, hoping that their paperwork will eventually go through. Each year, about 1 million migrants travel through Mexico. Half of them are female, and more than 60% are minors, most under the age of 10. Unaccompanied children are targeted for detention and deportation, despite a 2014 ruling that it was unlawful for children to be held in detention centers. 85 to 90% of them aren't even given the chance to apply for asylum before getting deported. Young migrant girls who are attempting to evade gender violence, sexual abuse, and gang brutality in their home countries become targets for both human traffickers and sexual predators. Most are forced into some kind of prostitution to pay for their trips. Others trafficked to the southern border to be exploited in bars and nightclubs. The lucky ones are simply trapped in Chiapas, which is no safer than the place they are fleeing. Because of the lasting effects of colonization, racism, patriarchy, and machismo, women all across Latin America still face significant barriers in upward mobility and gender equality. Femicide, the killing of women by men through motivations of hate, ownership, disrespect, or pleasure, has steadily increased over the last 2 decades. In response, new laws were created which distinguish gender-based homicide as a more serious offense, but tangible change has yet to be seen. So, we asked ourselves, how can architecture keep migrant girls safe, protect them from the environment, improve mental health? How can architecture empower migrant girls, educate them, give them a home? Can it at all? We wanted to build a shelter. We wanted to build a shelter to help save these girls. One that was socially responsible, culturally appropriate, passively designed, and gendered in the most feminist way. But after 2 months of research, we ran into a problem. We ran into a lot of problems. First, despite his 2018 campaign promises, the Mexican president cut funding aimed at helping women and girls, and femicide rose 10% since he's taken office. He's argued in favor of providing the money to women directly, except no system currently exists to identify women in need, and even then, financial relief does not address the problem of domestic violence. Second, In 2016, Donald Trump issued an executive order which blocked non-Mexican asylum seekers from entering the U.S. from Mexico. As a result, shelters, no matter how they are intended, under the current crisis, are all overfilled and unregulated, functioning as a trap for people between the place they come from and the place they are trying to go. Third, large groups of girls, especially migrant girls, whom no one cares if they live or die, is a high priority target for extreme violence and human trafficking. And this need for security is countered with a painful irony. Migrant girls are not safe alone, together, in the protection of their family, in the hands of the government, or integrated into society. And a permanent structure makes them more vulnerable to kidnapping and violence because it signifies their location to predators. And 4, we couldn't trust ourselves not to be tainted by the paternalistic viewpoint that is so embedded in North American white culture. For these reasons, our research did not lead us to a specific architectural proposal, and rather than design a shelter that can never be built, we opted to ask questions, to test the power of architecture against deep systemic humanitarian crisis, to address how inherently static practice can serve a dynamic population, to challenge our own system and vantage point, and to raise awareness of this dire situation as ex-girls ourselves. The question of shelter. In its simplest form, architecture works to protect you from the elements. For many migrants, this itself is a luxury. Ideally, it responds to the climate passively. In southern Mexico, overhangs for shading, passive cooling, natural daylighting, and south-facing windows are ideal. In Chiapas, 25% of the population are indigenous, and their dwellings are inherently sustainable, with their use of local materials. The Zapatistas are an indigenous feminist militia who fight for women's liberation within the political and social spheres of their communities. They work together, pool their resources, and share equally in the profits and decision-making. The group succeeds and fails together. Nested inside the community, girls are relatively safe because of their use of natural surveillance, territorial reinforcement, and firearms. But migrant girls must make do with structures they can find around the city. Any stray roof will at least protect you from the nighttime rain and the blaze of the sun. Unfortunately, in these instances, the surrounding people are the threat, instead of the womb-like protection of the Zapatistas. The question of mental health. Because detention centers lack surveillance, are overcrowded, and mixed genders, they create an environment ripe with dangers for a young girl traveling alone. Unaccompanied migrant minors are especially vulnerable to PTSD, anxiety, and depression, affecting their emotional stability, physical growth, social skills, and academic performance throughout their lives. Safety itself is a nuanced issue when it comes to mental health. The test of its functionality is not only its ability to keep predators out, but on how safe it makes the inhabitants feel. Security can be constructed physically, technologically, territorially, or perceptually to help achieve the desired effect. In an ideal world, we could build a shelter that addressed these concerns head-on, with architectural interventions that have been shown to support psychological healing. Small moves like giving the user control over lighting and the option for privacy can make a huge impact on someone who's recovering from PTSD. Children respond especially well to purposeful movement activities. Even the subtle use of color can help transform a building from a simple shelter and into an active place of healing. Unfortunately, the reality of everyday life means that migrants are always on the move. The church, which is never a home, still provides a physical structure that provides temporary relief, and a psychological structure which can help shelter the mind while the body suffers. The question of education. Education is at the core of female empowerment, and a crucial step for any woman to become independent members of society and lead lives devoid of poverty, crime, and abuse. At its best, architecture can support education, not only by designing ideal classrooms, libraries, and study rooms, but by using creative techniques to inspire the imagination. The 13th century fictional utopia, City of the Ladies, was a place of knowledge, power, safety, and secrecy, concealed by thick, tall walls. For these women, security was also a primary concern, building their fortress brick by brick. Inside, women were protected, healthy, and educated, while men faced environmental danger, illiteracy, and early death. In the real world, the Mexican government won't allow migrant children to attend educational institutions, and so migrant parents feel forced to choose between their children's education and their safety. In refugee camps, and out on the street, girls are forced to live in tents and ad hoc shelters, where only the harsh reality of everyday life serves the goal of education. The question of home. For many women, the home is not only where the heart is, but where they work. In the Victorian era, the cult of domesticity was founded upon the belief that a woman's role was homemaking, childbearing, submissiveness to their husbands, religious piety, and purity of the mind and body. In response, feminist utopias like the cooperative developed, where women were freed from unpaid domestic work through kitchenless dwellings. Other women found power in the sacrosanct of the kitchen, a place where in some cultures men rarely set foot, creating a safe space where women can control their domain. For example, Las Patronas is a group of women from Guadalupe who gained international power and prestige by cooking and distributing food to migrants. Traditionally, love and safety are also core elements of a home, but most unaccompanied migrant girls must leave the place they are loved in order to find a place they are safe. Ideally, a place that will provide them with the amenities they need to live and thrive, such as a place to be warm, a place to play, a place to heal, a place to learn, and a place to be fed. But to get there, they must first fight their way past the guards, the gangs, the wall, and the justice system. Instead, usually, they find themselves in shelters or detention centers, trapped in chapas, surrounded by predators, where their final destination is either deeper into the violence of Mexico or back into the violence of home.